What if the worst nightmare of your life comes true? Would you be able to survive it? This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Do you dare to listen? Every summer, Pussy's family would pack up their car and drive to their grandparents' cabin in the remote woods of Montana. It was a tradition they all looked forward to, a chance to escape the city and reconnect with nature. The cabin sat on a sprawling property surrounded by dense forest, with no neighbors for miles. Pussy, her older brother Liam, and their parents would spend their days hiking, fishing, and telling stories around the campfire. But this summer was different. This summer, Pussy's cousins had joined them. Emma, who was her age, and little Max, who was only 8. The kids had begged their parents to let them camp out in the woods, just like the adults used to do when they were younger. After some hesitation, the parents agreed, but only if they stayed close to the cabin and kept their walkie-talkies on. That night, the kids set up their tent in a small clearing about 100 yards from the cabin. The adults helped them pitch the tent and gave them strict instructions to call if anything felt off. Pussy, being the most responsible, promised to keep an eye on everyone. As the sun set, the kids roasted marshmallows over a small fire and told ghost stories, laughing nervously at every rustle in the trees. But when the fire died down and they crawled into their sleeping bags, the mood shifted. The forest grew eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Pussy was just about to suggest they head back to the cabin when they heard it. A low, guttural growl, like nothing she'd ever heard before. Emma froze, her eyes wide with fear. Max whimpered, clutching his flashlight. Liam, trying to be brave, whispered, "It's probably just an animal." But then the growl turned into a scream, a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream that sounded almost human. Pussy's heart pounded as she grabbed the walkie-talkie, but before she could press the button, the tent began to shake violently. Something was outside, something big. The kids screamed, scrambling to unzip the tent. Pussy was the first to bolt, her flashlight swinging wildly as she ran toward the cabin. The others followed, their footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. Behind them, the screams grew louder, closer. Pussy didn't dare look back. When they finally reached the cabin, their parents were already outside, alerted by the commotion. Pussy's dad grabbed his rifle and ran toward the woods, but he found nothing. No tracks, no signs of an animal, nothing. The next morning, the family packed up and left the cabin early. Pussy never forgot that night, the way the screams echoed in her ears, the way the tent shook as if something was trying to get in. To this day, she wonders what was out there in the woods, watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was the summer of 2020, and the world felt like it was collapsing under the weight of the pandemic. Beth, an adventurous soul, had always found solace in nature. With her life in shambles after a scandal at her workplace, a mistake that cost her colleagues their jobs and her reputation, she decided to escape the chaos. The constant barrage of angry messages and threats had driven her to change her number, move apartments, and eventually quit her job. The outdoors became her refuge, a place to breathe and forget. One weekend, she packed her gear and drove to a remote forest in the Pacific Northwest, a place she had never been before. The trailhead was empty, the parking lot desolate. The world was locked down, and Beth was grateful for the solitude. She hiked for hours, the crunch of pine needles under her boots the only sound accompanying her. By the time she reached a secluded clearing near a river, the sun was dipping below the trees. She set up her tent, started a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. As the fire crackled, she pulled out her book, trying to lose herself in the story, but her phone buzzed, shattering the peace. It was a text from an unknown number. "Beautiful spot you've found, Beth." Her stomach dropped. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. The next message came quickly. "The river sounds so calming, doesn't it?" Beth's heart raced. She stood, scanning the darkening woods around her. The firelight barely reached the trees, and the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. She grabbed the pepper spray from her bag, her hands trembling. Another text. "You shouldn't have come here alone." Panic surged through her. She shouted into the trees, "Who's there?" But only the rustle of leaves answered. She retreated to her tent, locking the zipper and clutching her phone. The text kept coming. "You can't hide forever. I'm closer than you think." Beth's mind raced. Was this one of the people from her past? Someone who had followed her here? Or was it something worse? The fire outside died, plunging the campsite into darkness. She sat frozen, listening to the silence. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the forest floor. They stopped just outside her tent. Beth held her breath, her fingers tightening around the pepper spray. A flashlight beam swept across the tent, illuminating the fabric for a split second. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo, a blurry image of her tent, taken from just a few feet away. The accompanying text read, "Sweet dreams, Beth." Something inside her snapped. She unzipped the tent, spraying the pepper spray blindly into the darkness. A muffled cry echoed, followed by the sound of someone stumbling away. Beth screamed, "Leave me alone!" Her voice echoed through the trees, but no one answered. She spent the rest of the night wide awake, clutching her phone and waiting for the next text. It never came. When dawn broke, she packed up and left as quickly as she could. She never returned to that forest, and the text stopped after that night. But even now, years later, she can't shake the feeling that someone, or something, is still watching her. Kamla and her father had always shared a love for the outdoors. Every summer, they would escape the city and head to a remote camping spot, leaving behind the noise and chaos of everyday life. This year, they chose a secluded area deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a place known for its dense forests and eerie silence. The first night was perfect. Clear skies, a crackling fire, and the comforting sounds of nature. They cooked dinner, told stories, and laughed under the stars. But the second night was different. The park ranger had informed them they were the only ones camping that weekend. At first, Kamla was thrilled. No noisy neighbors, no distractions. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest seemed to change. The air grew heavy, and the usual sounds of crickets and owls were replaced by an unsettling silence. Kamla's father joked about the spooky atmosphere, but she could tell he felt it too. The sense that they weren't alone. They decided to stay close to the fire, roasting marshmallows and playing cards to distract themselves. Around 9 p.m. they heard it, a loud, echoing thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. It came from the direction of the river, about 100 yards away. Kamla's father grabbed a flashlight and scanned the trees, but there was nothing. They tried to brush it off, but the sound came again, closer this time. Then again, even closer. By the fourth thud, it was clear something was moving toward them. Kamla's heart raced as her father whispered, "Get in the tent." They scrambled inside, leaving the fire burning brightly in hopes it would keep whatever was out there at bay. As they crouched in the tent, Kamla heard a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the air and into her chest. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, one that made her skin crawl. Her father clutched a small pocket knife, his hands trembling. Then came the scream, a sound that was neither human nor animal, something alien and terrifying. Kamla buried her face in her sleeping bag, too scared to move. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in the tent, disoriented and drenched in sweat. Her phone was dead, even though it had been fully charged the night before. Her father's phone was dead too. They stepped outside to find the campsite untouched, the fire reduced to ashes, and the forest eerily silent. They packed up in a hurry, not speaking until they were safely in the car. Kamla's father admitted he had seen something, a shadowy figure, tall and unnatural, standing at the edge of the campsite. They never went back to that spot, and Kamla still can't explain what happened that night. All she knows is that something was out there, watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake.